Ahoy! On one of the recent videos, New World asked as a community question, what is the biggest change we should make to PvP in the upcoming seasons? And of course, there are many answers that focus on different types of content that people like to see, different types of maps, new modes altogether and all that stuff, and I will talk about that very soon, probably tomorrow. But I wanted to specifically address one aspect of PvP that I think is generally a bit neglected because we are so used to the status quo. If you played New World for the first time during the open beta or after that, then you would have never seen or known anything else, but there is something beyond your horizon. What I'm talking about here is stamina. Stamina in New World went through a surprising amount of iterations. Most of them happened before launch and some of them actually happened after launch as well. So I'd like to invite you to join me on a little trip down memory lane, and then we'll talk about the implications for the future and how this could affect the game going forward as well. The first thing that I want to look at or want to show you here are the original stamina values that we had during the first preview playtest. There were even more options before that, but that was simply before my time, so I never got to witness it. During the preview, we had a very interesting stamina system that not only revolved around your dodging or blocking, but also other abilities you used. If you look closely here, you will notice that there are various actions that actually stop my stamina recovery, like for example using abilities. So generally, stamina had to be managed a lot more carefully because there were many things that would prevent you from regaining stamina. At the same time, this was also at a time when staggers were still very common, especially for melee. So on one hand you had this more careful stamina management, then on the other hand you had staggers if a melee got close to you. As far as I've been told by other players that actually PvP'd at the time, this usually meant that if you were a ranged player and a melee managed to get close to you, you were dead, but it was harder for them to actually get close to you in the first place. That would change in later test phases where there were pretty significant changes to stamina. I made a video about that back then where you can see what happened. Essentially, the stamina recovery system used to work completely differently in multiple ways. First of all, you have to keep in mind that no one was using hearty back then, so everyone was just sitting on 100 stamina. But on top of that, the regeneration worked completely differently. There was no penalty for going down to 0 stamina, even if you did so through dodging. Now you can actually do it again through blocking, but that's a very recent change. So you wouldn't get any lowered movement speed, which is something they introduced very last second before the game launched. On the other hand, the stamina regeneration itself was also different in different phases, and you were actually encouraged in some ways to go to 0 stamina. If your stamina was not full, and it was not completely empty either, then the regeneration was roughly 1/3 of what we have today. So in the same time span that we then regenerated 8 stamina, you now regenerate roughly 26 stamina. But on the other hand, going from 0 stamina back to full stamina was way quicker. This would take just slightly more than half the time that it does now. Keep in mind the numbers here at the end are frames. The regeneration rate now is consistent between you having completely empty stamina or you having partial stamina when it comes to the speed at which the regeneration happens once it kicks in. As such, back then, if you went down to 0 stamina, the regeneration was actually faster than it is now at any point of stamina. But this had a very noticeable and important impact on the gameplay, because you had to make a very conscious choice. Am I going to dodge twice and be out of stamina, but also be able to get my stamina back quickly? Or am I gonna wait on half stamina, get my stamina back slower, but have a dodge in reserve if I'm getting attacked? Again, this is less of a thought process now in the first place because of hearty being used almost everywhere, especially for light and heavy users. Medium is a bit of a different story, but it's definitely something that was incredibly crucial for combat. What you, for example, frequently see now is ranged players using one dodge to get various passives up, be that opals or other effects that they have in their skill trees in order to get those extra benefits, deal that extra damage. That is something you would normally not have done back then, because then you would be sitting on half stamina, which would be the least ideal starting scenario, since you wouldn't be able to dodge multiple times if someone gets close to you, but you would also have very slow stamina regeneration. So every dodge was a very conscious decision. Back then, quite a few players actually made fun of the new system, saying that it's way too much of a dodge fiesta, and I don't necessarily disagree. Since then, we had way more changes that pushed it further in the direction of being able to dodge as much as possible. We now have stalwart up as a buff all the time, and in the near future we don't even need to have it from the towns anymore, we'll just have it as far as I understand it. There is stamina recovery and shirking energy, both were added to the game later, so overall you will have a very consistent stamina influx while fighting. With the next patch, even sturdy energy may become a more appealing option to get more stamina back as well, though that typically probably won't affect light armor users as much, for example, so it might not make that much of a difference. Now, I am not advocating for a straight return to the old system, because I think at this point the game has had many changes that affect it in other ways as well that may not make this ideal. For example, back then you wouldn't get slowed in terms of your dodge rolls when you were hit by melees, even though before that we had the stagger. But I do think that taking inspiration from these previous systems could be helpful for New World's combat right now and improve it. I personally think that stamina recovery and shirking energy should not be a thing, because they become so mandatory on your armor that they are required, and they make the fighting more gimmicky than it has to be in my eyes. I posted as much as a reply to that comment. And similarly, other perks that affect stamina could, in my opinion, also possibly be removed. Now, this next one is definitely going to be controversial, but I personally believe that even hearty is a perk that was never really implemented in the game in a way where it was considered beforehand if this would be good for balance, and I don't think that the people that originally designed the combat balance were thinking about it with hearty in mind. I don't think they were planning for everyone to have hearty in order to have that third dodge in light or in heavy and have such a super impactful perk that is ultimately required by everyone except medium users, and even many medium users still prefer to use it because it's such a strong perk. In the previous patches, Amazon has quite significantly reduced various CCs, and other CCs have also been affected by that over time. So with there being less CCs, I think having less stamina available and less stamina recoveries overall is less of an issue. I further believe that a slightly more nuanced stamina system that requires you to think a little bit more would appeal to many of the players that originally liked New World but eventually left the game because they felt like the direction it took was not the skill-based game that they were looking for. And of course, with the expansion on the horizon, that would be very good timing to appeal to some of those players that may be willing to check it out again. Of course, this is purely personal opinion and other people might completely disagree and love the current stamina system, but I do think that there's most certainly room for improvement. However, that only covers one of the aspects of the PvP changes that I think New World should be seeing in the future. In one of my next videos, I'll be talking about exactly that and discuss what I believe New World should be seeing over the next month or the next half year or so in terms of PvP content and what I'd like to see in the future. If you're interested in that, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. Thanks to my patrons for supporting this video, and thank you for watching. SLOTH out.